Give it another 20 seconds and it'll be good to go. Loading. All right, and we're live.
Okay, thank you, Toys.
No problem. Let me just pass the baton back to you, and you're good to go. Why is it not letting me do this? Here we go. Yes. There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
Good evening. It's Tuesday, June 23rd, 2020. The time is 7:01. We're here for the final Westchester County Rent Guidelines Board meeting for 2020, which is being brought to you by Zoom. I'll go ahead and read the notice that appears at the beginning of the public notice. In response to the governor's directive to take every effort to keep New Yorkers safe and mitigate the spread of COVID-19, and pursuant to Executive Order 202-1, which allows for the suspension of the Public Officers Law, Westchester County Rent Guidelines Board will be conducting public hearings to set guideline rates of rent adjustment for housing accommodations within its jurisdiction. Subject to the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, for leases commencing between October 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2021 via teleconference. Instructions for members of the public to simultaneously view or listen to the meetings have been posted to HCR's website for the Office of Rent Administration under the public hearing section prior to all of the meetings. And the hearings will also later be transcribed and the public will have the ability to view the transcripts. So with that being said, Madam Chair, I will send it over to you to call the roll.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is our last meeting for the season. Tonight, we are going to hit the rebuttals of tenants and owners representatives. And immediately after that, we are going to proceed with the vote for rent adjustments. I will now take roll call. Please respond if you're present. Belin Aqua.
Present.
Lamomba Joe.
Present.
Eddie Mae Burns.
Present.
Elliot Sherson. Elliot.
Hold on. Present.
Kenneth Finger.
I'm here.
Evelyn Santiago.
Present.
Tamara Stewart.
Present.
And Elsa Rubin, public member, present. Let the record show that we have a quorum. I will now ask our counsel, Peter Stecker, if he has any announcements or.
Just to remind everyone that there will be one final meeting of the Rent Guidelines Board this year, which will likely take place in September, which will be to certify whatever guidelines the board adopts this evening. And also the question's been asked a few times during these meetings, how many YouTube views there have been. I haven't had a firm answer for that any of the nights, but tonight I can tell you cumulatively over the 5 meetings we've had, there's been 205 total views. So with that being said, that's really all I have.
Thank you. So I will now ask the tenant and owner representatives who is going to go first. I think Kenneth went first last time. So Tamara, I think it's your turn to go first, or you want to debate it among yourselves?
I'm fine with first or second, whichever the owners prefer.
I prefer second.
Okay. So Tamara, it's your turn.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, Chairwoman Rubin, fellow board members, Deputy Counsel Stecker, and members of the public. We've heard a lot from landlords and their advocates, much of it the same complaints that we hear from them year after year. That DHCR survey numbers are inaccurate, that our net operating income calculation is wrong, that capital expenses like mortgage interest and depreciation should be counted as operating expenses, and that landlords just can't make ends meet without an increase, despite evidence to the contrary. I took the liberty of sending you some bullet points earlier today that highlight key points that I believe you should consider, as well as responses to some owner, quote, fake facts, unquote, that should be dismissed. The coronavirus pandemic is posing unthinkable, possibly long-term threats to public health and the economy. I just read another sobering article today in the city newsletter that stated that New York City's independent budget office projected last month that it will take until 2024 for the city to reclaim the jobs lost over the past 3 months. While both landlords and tenants are being affected by these momentous events, the economic health and resources of the two groups are far from equal. Even before the advent of COVID-19, the facts warranted a rent freeze for Westchester tenants. Owners have been steadily enjoying a net operating income of about 38% for the past 4 years, and the first 6 months of implementation of HSTPA has not changed their healthy bottom line. The cost of heating oil is down to 2004 levels, which is half of 2008's high, with heightened levels of uncertainty predicted through 2021. Meanwhile, fixed income seniors aren't expected to see a cost of living increase in 2021, and possibly not in 2022 either. Our board has passed higher increases for each of the past 4 years than any of the other rent guidelines boards, while the need for affordable housing in Westchester is at a critical level, according to last year's housing needs assessment. Clearly, owners had an advantage over tenants in a pre-pandemic assessment, and no rent increase is warranted. More importantly, we know that the advent of the coronavirus pandemic has wrought havoc with the economy, which affects all of us, regardless of where we live. Double-digit unemployment that is being compared to the Great Depression has taken residence in our nation, with low-income Black and Latino workers being hardest hit financially because of their overrepresentation in occupations that have faced higher rates of job loss. To add insult to injury, these same workers have the dubious distinction of being, quote, essential workers, end quote, whose jobs have put them at higher risk of contracting COVID-19, even as their health profiles make it more likely that they could die from the disease if they catch it. No or inadequate health insurance also make the prospect of serious illness or even death a real possibility for many essential workers. Private sector unemployment plummeted 25% in April, and there are serious concerns that there's a second wave of new layoffs heading our way once PPP loans have been forgiven. The Federal Reserve is predicting years of high unemployment, and the $600 per week of enhanced unemployment benefits that have been a lifeline enabling many tenants to pay their rent is set to expire on July 31st. Without additional emergency government assistance, homelessness is expected to rise 45%. While it is heartening that some owners have stepped up and made payment arrangements with some of their tenants, I don't recall hearing owners or their reps asserting that they won't pursue evictions once the moratorium is lifted. These are the daunting circumstances that tenants are facing with limited temporary assistance in the wake of COVID-19. Landlords are also being challenged by the current economic circumstances, although they are far more likely to be able to work from home, have high quality health insurance, savings, investments, and assets to help them combat the coronavirus. In addition, owners have access to federal assistance through the PPP Flexibility Act, EIDL federal loans up to $2 million each with one-year deferred repayment, federally backed mortgage forbearance, non-GAAP loan modifications, tax benefits, and a $45 billion Federal Reserve program, plus whatever assistance becomes available for real estate and other taxes. Owners are clearly in a far better position to weather the current storm than the tenants who rent from them. Beyond these compelling facts in favor of a rent freeze, please don't forget that Westchester County has been and is subject to the same economic, racial, and healthcare inequalities that have been brutally exposed by COVID-19. Our country's long-standing injustices created redlining and housing discrimination, which have hindered Black and Latino wealth creation and created overrepresentation of Black and Latino families in rental housing. Housing inequality is real. During our hearings, while owner after owner railed against rent regulation in general, HSTPA in particular, and threatened to withhold maintenance and necessary repairs if it means cutting one iota into their healthy investment profits, tenant voices were silenced because the technology gap is real, and it works against those of limited means, little education, and no broadband access. We haven't inherited assets, Many tenants are like me. We rent out of necessity and not by choice. We haven't inherited assets or wealth, and the salary increases that we receive are minimal at best. A rent increase on the backs of rent-burdened tenants and fixed-income seniors so that owners can expand for a fifth year running. Their 38% net operating income would be unjustified, unfair, and harmful under the current dire circumstances. That's why New York City just passed its third rent freeze since 2015, and Rockland rents have been frozen since 2016. Westchester ETPA tenants' situation is similar to that of our tenants in neighboring communities, but we've raised our rents more than Rockland, Nassau, and New York City for each of the past 4 years. Westchester ETPA tenants need and deserve our consideration as they engage in an extremely lopsided battle with coronavirus, the economy, and landlords who are refusing to make necessary capital improvements because they can no longer game the system and overcharge for MCIs and IAIs indefinitely. If we truly appreciate our essential workers and healthcare heroes, many of whom live in ETPA buildings, and if we believe that redlining, housing discrimination, and systemic racism are wrong, that be right, our actions should reflect our values. Please do what little we can to support overwhelmed tenants and pass 0% increases on 1- and 2-year lease renewals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Any question for Ms. Stewart? Yes, Evelyn.
Tamara, last week we had a discussion about what mitigating factors landlords have in terms of mitigating income loss. And there was a discussion about whether or not they qualified for the PPP loans that turn into grants. In your rebuttal, your written rebuttal, there is one of the bullets says that the CARES Act provides direct relief to landlords with federally backed mortgages. Could you expand on that, please?
In the supplement that I sent out on Sunday,
Yes,
there
on the
was
first page.
right. There was an article in there in the section on relief that was available to landlords that went into detail about the various assistance that is available to landlords. So let me see.
I think it's on page 3.
With regard to, are you speaking about the SBA loans, the Paycheck Protection Program, because they added the piece where they could,
Yes.
they have enhanced the access to those funds. And there is also an article in there that said that even though they weren't initially supposed to get them, some have gotten it anyway.
Thank you.
Anybody else? If no one else has a question, we will proceed with Mr. Elliot Cherson.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
That time of the year again. When I made my rebuttal statement last year, I pointed out that to the new members of the board, and we had a few last year, about my experiences in the real estate industry as a practicing lawyer in real estate litigation with a specialty in the housing courts of New York City and Westchester County. Mr. Finger has a similar experience and expertise, although he's been doing it a little longer than me. Yes, smile. All right, anyway. These are some of the quotes from last year's statement that I find to be just as relevant and worth repeating, as most of them have come true. Last year, the HSTPA was passed, and obviously, Mr. Finger and I made a lot of points about how it's going to negatively impact the landlords, but now it's come to pass. This is a quote from last year. I'm not going to say that every one of my clients is a saint. You can't say that about any business. However, I can tell you that all of my clients, large and small, deeply care about their tenants. They all strive to provide decent and safe housing for their tenants. No exceptions. To do so, they need funds to take care of the buildings. The money comes from one of only the following 4 sources. 1, rental income. 2, personal funds. 3, family funds. And 4 would be banks and other financial institutions. And by the way, before I even get into that, about taking care of people, the COVID epidemic has added on additional burdens to landlords, which they have taken on willingly in sanitizing buildings, cleaning the buildings, and doing all of the necessary work in order to keep them as COVID-free as possible. The first category is rental income. This is by far the largest source. Buildings are run for a profit. This is no secret. So taking money from personal or family funds is counterproductive and detrimental to the overall financial health of a building. Next one is bank loans. By and large, this option, I said it last year that they won't happen. Now we know it has happened. By and large, the option of bank loans, whether it's refinancing or just getting a loan, does not exist, as very few, if any, banks will refinance due to HSTPA. The banks, I've heard this from many clients, and I've spoken to Chase, which is my own bank. Because of HSTPA, the banks no longer know how to value a building. They used to before, but they don't anymore. And because of these changes, they are not willing, except under the most onerous of conditions, to refinance the mortgage or loan any additional monies. So because of that, the buildings are not worth what they were before, and they're worth substantially less. People say, whether it's on this board or in the general public, that, okay, it's not such a great business anymore. Sell the building. That's a great idea. The problem is that there are no buyers. There are no buyers for the type of rent-stabilized buildings in Yonkers, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, etc., that exist. And even if you have a person who's willing to purchase these buildings, which are by and large 100 or to 60, 70 years old, they're not there. And if they do find someone, the banks are not willing to loan for the new seller. I'm sorry, for the buyer. So the landlord is stuck with his building. He'd like to sell, but he can't sell. He'd like to do things, but he can't. That's the reality of the situation. Last year, I said the new law would result in the following. A, no more building-wide improvements due to the death of MCIs for new roofs, heating systems, elevators, windows, security systems, replumbing gas and water lines, new electric service, etc. This is the reality for the past year. No more renovations in apartments, such as new kitchens, bathroom floors and walls, doors, etc. This is the reality of the past year. Any necessary repairs will be done with patches, Band-Aids, and spit. This is the reality of the past year. And the cause of all of these detriments, cause of all of this is to the detriment of the tenants, due to the elimination of the by New York State of vacancy increases, MCIs, IAIs, etc. Most landlords are so disgusted by the turn of events over the past year that they would sell the building but can't find a buyer. As I said, even if they could find a buyer, it would be a fire sale, and the buyer probably can't even find a mortgage. And it results in buildings they no longer want to own. They will not do any major repairs or renovations. A new tenant will simply get a coat of white paint, and that's it. And we've talked about this a number of times. They will keep vacant apartments, which were rented, low-rent apartments, vacant, because it's simply not worth renting at the same exact amount an apartment that a person in all likelihood, with a rent that low, you probably had a person living there for many, many, many decades, and grandma, grandpa. And in all likelihood, not much has been done to the apartment. Grandma and grandpa didn't want a lot of things done to the apartment, in all likelihood. So when those apartments in the past became vacant, they needed new bathrooms, they needed new kitchens, they needed new floors, walls, doors, you name it. That cost is extensive. And before, at least the landlord could recoup some of that. That no longer exists. Last year, a year ago, in a New York Times editorial dated June 10th, 2019, the New York Times said, the government needs to make sure that owners of rent-stabilized buildings are earning a sufficient return so that real estate remains an attractive investment. That was last year. In an editorial dated June 16th, 2020, which of course is this year, in the New York Post, the Post said, tenants hit financially by COVID may be having trouble making the rent, but the Rent Guidelines Board is seriously out of touch to think landlords aren't hurting too and can bear another rent freeze. A rent freeze will worsen the pain for landlords struggling to pay their bills when the lockdowns have left a quarter of all tenants paying no rent at all. To freeze rents, the board must ignore its own data showing a 3.7% bump in the landlord's costs, that's New York, and a 0.6 deduction or dip in their net income from 2017 to 2018, which was the first in 15 years. Ken Fingeror gave the numbers last week concerning Westchester. And the move, this is, they keep going on. This is from the Post still. The move will ultimately harm tenants, because landlords will have to cut back on services to survive. Already more and more buildings are falling into financial distress. Ironically, many building owners are the very same people that Mayor de Blasio says he wants to help. Mom and pop operators, immigrants, people of color. Yet since they aren't as numerous as tenants, he has no qualms about squeezing them. As the Real Deal stated a year ago on June 14th, 2019, New York Community Bank, Signature Bank, and Dime Community Bank, which are three of the largest lenders to multifamily rent-stabilized housing, have lost a combined $2.5 billion with a billion in market capitalization since June 2019, when the new laws became operable. The banks simply won't lend for refis or purchases or major repairs. Another article in The Real Deal on June 18th, 2019 has also come to pass. They said this last year. The removal of vacancy deregulation means that landlords no longer have a clear end goal when attempting to raise rents. At this point, under the new rules, landlords have used up all of the available tools to increase rent beyond any approved RGB rent hikes. That means that what we do for the Westchester County landlords, we are the only manner, the only way that rents can be raised whatsoever. Last year, when you were listening to me or Ken, you probably thought that a lot of what we were saying about the impact of HSTPA was like scare tactics. But name one of the predictions that I've just cited, and these were cited by major publications, not just myself, has come, name one of the predictions that has not come true. There are none. None. A few items in rebuttal to Tamara's statements last week and tonight. Ms. Stewart made light of the landlord's allegations concerning apartments renting for less than $800 per month. The surveys of 3,447 apartments, which is 6% of all surveyed apartments, shows that there are 185 such apartments. And of the 185 such apartments, 39 are below $600. 49 are between $601 and $700. 97 apartments are between $701 and $800. Again, a total of 185. And if you extrapolate that figure to include all 27,000 ETPA apartments in the county, it comes to 1,620 apartments that are renting for less than $800 per month. It is not an insignificant figure. Ms. Stewart also cited Ms. Roach's handouts. And she stated that, Ms. Roach, I guess, she stated that large owners have access to capital markets and several federal programs already offering them billions, that's again with a B, billions in assistance. And then she has footnote number 13, which Ms. Stewart also cited last week, or today or last week. Footnote 13 says, in addition to availing themselves of PPP loans not originally intended for landlords, and the loosening forgiveness requirements of the June 5 PPP Flexibility Act, the federal government has put in place EIDL loans of up to $2 million with no repayment for 1 year, SBA bridge loans, forbearance for federally backed mortgages, non-GAAP loan modifications, tax benefits, and $454 billion, again with the B, in Federal Reserve programs. And then she cites an article of some sort. That's just bunk. None of that exists. I mean, don't you think we all would have heard on the news, in publications, that landlords are getting $454 billion in Federal Reserve program? I mean, obviously we saw in the news, there was a big to-do about large corporations, airlines, huge corporations getting PPP money. And when it became known, as I recall, most of those corporations were forced to return the monies to the federal government. Have you heard of anything about a $454 billion program to give money to landlords? It doesn't exist. There's no EIDL loans of up to $2 million with no repayment for 1 year. This is fantasy, pure, unadulterated fantasy. It does not exist. Ms. Stewart also claims that there will be an avalanche of evictions. There is no substantiation of same. The courts are presently in a basically non-operating state, even though the court administrators are saying otherwise lately. The very earliest any new case will appear on a court calendar, in my guess, and it's basically a guess, is September or October. And at that point, the goal of the court system is to have every single tenant have an attorney. And there'll be a conference, a virtual conference like what we're doing between the landlord's attorney, the tenant, tenant, and their counsel. And according to Gene Schneider, who's an administrative judge in the city, and basically these things apply to Westchester as well, even if you have your first conference in September or October, the next date is probably going to be 3 months from then. So that will bring us already into 2021 for the second appearance. In order to have anybody be evicted, you have to have a judgment of possession, and you have to have a warrant issued to a marshal. At the present time, and for the foreseeable future, the courts, pursuant to Cuomo's order, and the administrative judges, they have stated unequivocally that there will be no default judgments. In other words, if a tenant fails to appear, a tenant fails to answer, no default judgments whatsoever. So if a tenant gets a petition and they just ignore it, and people do that, and they just ignore it, nothing is going to happen to them. There is no hammer to make them or want to pay the rent because it doesn't exist. And they have stated that that will be the case for the foreseeable future. I don't have a crystal ball that's going to tell us when that, the old system, the normalcy that existed before March will come back, but it's going to be a long time. It's a very lengthy process. It just is. Ms. Stewart also stated in her presentation that Assistant Commissioner Guy Alba, quote, signed off, unquote, on Ms. Roach's analysis of the cost of living chart as accurate. When questioned by Mr. Finger about this, Ms. Stewart stated that, quote, Guy Alba included Roach's calculations in the explanatory statement, thereby confirming Mr. Alba's signing off, quote, unquote, signing off, unquote. Roach's position is that interest and depreciation should not be included, among other things, because there is this 38% profit for landlords. On June 17th, 2020, Guy Alba responded to Ken Finger's query about this, and Mr. Alba stated, and I'm going to show it to you in a second. Good morning, Ken. This is June 17th, 2020, last week. I do not, quote, sign off, unquote, on products that I did not structure, create, and analyze on my own or through my staff. Be well and stay safe. I'm hoping that you could, that you can read this, or I can send it to Peter. Can I send that to you, Peter, or just scan it through? You're muted, Peter.
Yeah, sure. I can scan it.
So I'll scan it to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So as soon as I finish, I'll put it in the scanner. So that when I heard that statement, it was like, wow. I mean, if I'm a public member, I'm saying to myself, wow, Guy Alba is endorsing Ms. Roach's figures and Ms. Stewart's claims. That's pretty hefty. I would like Guy to substantiate or acknowledge and agree to some of the claims, the statements that we're making. But it's not the case. And I think most of us know Guy for many, many years. This is not something he would do. And why Ms. Stewart brought that up or made that statement is beyond me. Based upon some of the things that Tamara stated tonight, I just have a few other points and I'm almost done. She stated Westchester County needs affordable housing. There is no doubt about that. New York City needs affordable housing. Nassau County needs it. Rockland County, the whole state, the whole country needs affordable housing. But landlords can't build it. The only entity that can build new affordable housing is the government, whether it's the state of New York, the city of New York, or the United States government. And I think we all know that the United States government under the present administration, who has been trying for the past 3.5 years to cut back on Section 8 vouchers, they're not going to be doing the building that went on, let's say, in the 1970s, the 1960s, and 1970s. That's not going to happen. And as far as NYCHA, is that really something you want to emulate? I doubt it. This is not the burden of private landlords. It is the burden of the government to provide safe and affordable housing for people who can't afford it. It's as simple as that. There's too much, it takes too much money to build buildings and get a lesser rent because the people are lower income. One of the things that Ms. Stewart also brought up, and I would too if I was her, talks about the rent freeze in New York City. The rent freeze in New York City, unlike our board, I'm not sure if everybody understands this or knows it, so if I'm repeating it, please forgive me. The New York City Rent Guidelines Board, all 9 of them, are appointed by the mayor of the city of New York. The landlords don't get to pick 2, sort of like what we do. The tenant organizations don't get to pick 2, like our board. And the 5 public members as well are all appointed by the mayor. And he also designates who the chairperson of the board will be. They're all appointed by him. How many speeches has Bill de Blasio made in the past few months leading up to the RGB hearings in New York City, in which he said, I want a 0 increase. I want a 0 increase. That's hard if you're appointed by this guy to say no to. It's almost impossible. That's why there should be a separation to insulate, but there isn't. It's like federal judges. They get appointed, they're appointed for life, and the president, whoever the president is, can say whatever he or she wants. But it's up to the Supreme Court to make their decisions because the president has no influence over them because they have this lifetime appointment. So that doesn't exist. It's a terrible system, and that's how they do it. And just last but not least, landlords, despite the statements that have been made, are not getting these loans. They are not getting the financial assistance that has been presented to this board. As a practical matter, it doesn't exist. There has so far been no mortgage relief. There has been no bills passed in Albany that give landlords any type of relief. For example, taxes. Maybe make the taxes payable over more time or reduce the taxes. The taxes obviously need to be paid because the city of New York and the city of Yonkers and the city of Mount Vernon all need that money to run the city. And yes, there's less income tax and sales tax because of the COVID. So where is the greatest source of income? It's real estate taxes. And there is no forgiveness by the states, the cities, the municipalities. It's due July 1st. You have to pay it July 1st. And if you don't pay it July 1st, there are interest and penalties. And that goes for the water charges, and that goes for everything else. So the tenants have a tremendous break, if that's the right word, maybe not, with regard to the COVID. They don't have to pay the rent now because the court system is shut down for all practical purposes. There's nothing a landlord could do if you don't pay the rent. That's commercial or residential. And most of my clients I've spoken to, any tenant who goes to the landlord and says, I am a COVID victim, I lost my job, they all say, the landlords, okay, I'm sorry to hear it, we understand. How would you like to pay it back? We will give you time. How much time do you want? And by and large, they are more than willing to give payout. And this is without going to court. And that's what all of the landlords are doing. even though they're taking it on the chin, because not everybody's going to them and saying, I would like to pay you, Mr. Landlord, but I need more time. Most people don't do that. And the commercial premises, they don't do anything. And a lot of them are open. It's not as if they're closed. A lot of them are open. I have one client in Co-op City. The huge store has been open since the beginning with a very high rent. He pays nothing. And he's got, because of the COVID and the other stores being closed, he's got probably twice the business that he had before.
Mr. Jerson?
I'm done.
Okay. You want to summarize?
How's that? No, I think I did already, but thank you, Ms. Rubin.
Thank you.
Elsa, I have one
Yes.
matter of information I'd like to point out. I understand that the Kavanaugh bill that we talked about last week was passed. It is being funded with $100 million that goes to the tenants to make up for the inability to pay rent for those that are paying over 30% of their income in rent. And it actually goes to the landlord on behalf of the tenants. So we talked about the Kavanaugh bill, so I just wanted to make the board aware that there is financial assistance for those tenants that can't meet their obligations because of the COVID. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Anybody else has a question for Mr. Cherson? Yes, Mrs. Stewart.
I would like to address a couple of Mr. Cherson's points that are inaccurate. First, please let me know if you did not receive a sheet from the statisticians that says cost to income ratio, both one side including interest and depreciation and the other side excluding interest and depreciation, Westchester County, 1987 to 2019. That chart from which Genevieve Roach calculates net operating income is one that initially she first started doing when she was on the board, and that has since been adopted by the statisticians such that they include it every year in the paperwork that we receive when they do their presentation. So it seems to me that if they're providing that information that was first provided because Genevieve Roche started that calculation and they've continued it, that would imply that they have verified that in fact that information is accurate since they are producing it and providing it. I also do recall a number of past rent guidelines, explanatory statements that did include Ms. Roche's calculations in them. So I can't imagine that they'd have been including a bunch of explanatory statements that were inaccurate if there was not somebody taking a look to make sure that the information that was being presented was verifiable. So that's one point. Another point that Mr. Cherson brought up, in the supplement that I sent on Father's Day, there is an article from Greenberg Gluster dated April 7th, and the title is Real Estate Implication of the CARES Act. And it is from that article that I make the assertion that there are quite a few options and opportunities, assistance programs that are available to landlords. The $454 billion is not only available to landlords, but they are eligible to apply as other businesses are eligible to apply. The same thing with the PPP FA, where more latitude is allowed for businesses that apply to be able to get PPP money to use for things other than payroll. So that information I did provide to folks on Sunday. I refer you back to that. In addition, the repeated statement that guideline increases are the only way that landlords can increase their income. It's just inaccurate. Landlords are still eligible to apply for IAIs and MCIs. Granted, they may not find them as attractive as they found in years past because the percentage that they can charge back has been reduced. And they can't, game the system indefinitely by inflating rents through IAIs and MCIs that stay in that are effective in perpetuity. However, 30 years is a good long time, and the calculation was done in such a way that landlords do recoup the monies that they spend on MCIs and IAIs that have been approved by HCR. And so to act like that avenue is no longer available is just inaccurate. On top of that, there was an article that I sent you all on Sunday that says, what can an equitable pandemic rental assistance program look like in New York? And one of the points that gets made in that article is that there are a lot of landlords that are having trouble financially because they are over leveraged because of either speculation or monies that they took out of their properties after 2008 and the mortgage crisis, and based on the expectation that they were going to be able to jack up rents in their buildings and get long-time tenants out, get new tenants in, push the rents up to market rate. And now that HSTPA has finally righted a 20-plus year wrong, landlords are saying, oh, we can't, our buildings aren't worth anything, we can't do anything. No, it's not tenants' fault that some landlords have chosen to take on more debt than they can comfortably afford. That's got nothing to do with tenants. Tenants certainly weren't the ones that approved these loans, but that article does a very good job of addressing some of those concerns. And that's not me saying that. That is what has been written on the subject. Last but not least, Mr. Finger just referred to the Kavanaugh Act, which in fact is designed to provide some rental assistance for some tenants who may be in need. Unfortunately, and even the people who wrote and passed the bill are honest enough to say it's not enough money. It doesn't include everybody. There are definitely tenants that will fall through the cracks who are in need of assistance. The means test is questionable. And the fact is that because the funds go directly to landlords, there is no guarantee that tenants are protected from evicted even after the landlords get the money from that program. So those are the key points that I wanted to address.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Finger.
I have just a couple of comments. Number one, the statute provides that we're supposed to look at data, not newspaper articles. I would suspect that if we wanted to trade newspaper articles, we could spend the next 3 years finding articles that support our position. And I have a little concern about making decisions about what an article said in either April or May or June or whenever. I'll leave it up to Mr. Cherson to deal with the issue of what he pointed out, but I am the one that wrote to Mr. Alba, and certainly the form is a form that the explanatory statement refers to, as it refers to the fact that the surveys show that expenses went up more than income in the past 4 years, as it shows that what the arguments of the parties were, which is what I believe Mr. Alba was referring to when he disputed the fact that he confirmed anything. Certainly, he does put forth different contentions by the different parties. That doesn't mean he confirms them or affirms them. And I think that Mr. Cherson will submit the email.
Ready.
Specifically said he didn't do that. And another point, but I lost my train of thought. I'll get back to that later.
I've emailed Mr. Alba's statement, I think, to everybody, Peter and the members of the board. April, I might have left you off. Sorry. Maybe Peter, you could send that off to her. Be great. Did everybody get it? Anybody get it?
No.
No, nobody got it.
I just got it.
Oh, no. Ken, I might not have sent it to you. I know you know it's in it. I mean, the response to it is what it is. I mean, here we have the document from Mr. Alba that says no. What Ms. Stewart is saying and Ms. Roach is saying, or their allegations about himself and his what his representations are, is simply not fact. Plain and simple.
May I just interject? I think that what Ms. Stewart is implying is that it was a suggestion, upon a suggestion from Ms. Roche, that this new line, maybe a new column was added, and that's what I understand.
No,
Is
it
that
wasn't
correct?
added. That column has been there since I've been on the board for the past 20 years. They've always had that column, which doesn't include both the cost of an improvement. It doesn't include interest and depreciation, but it also doesn't include the cost of MCIs and the cost of IAIs, only the amortized cost, and you have to do it for tax purposes over 27 years. And the last point I had wanted to make before was that Ms. Stewart said that you get back the cost of your MCI. Well, what you get back is 2% a year for 30 years. The way I calculate that, if you multiply 2% times 30 years, you get 60%. So the maximum you can get back is 60% over 30 years. And I mentioned this last week, that when you figure out the present day value of getting back 2% over 30 years, it's certainly nowhere near 30 or 40, even 30 or 40%. And then after 30 years, it comes off the rent anyway. So yes, you get something back. You certainly don't get back enough, considering you don't get back the value of the financing to put in a major capital improvement to make it worthwhile doing it.
Anybody else?
Can I just add something to that, Ms. Rubin?
Sure.
Again, Ms. Stewart said, I believe, hopefully I'm quoting you correctly, that landlords can take on more debt. If they wanted to, they could always just take on more debt to put in a new elevator or a roof or something like that. Whatever it is, taking on more debt means that somebody's going to give you the money. And that somebody, unless it's Grandpa or Uncle Joe, is a bank. That's who gives the money. That's who, gives you a mortgage, gives you money secured by the building, and they will give you the funds to put on a new roof, for example. But they're not doing it anymore. Banks are not lending for that purpose anymore, because they don't even think, they're worried about getting the original mortgage back. They're worried about getting that amount to add on to it, another few $100,000 or whatever. They're taking an even greater risk. Hey, if they can't pay back $2 million, how are they going to pay back $2.2 million? And that's the reality that we're living in. It is the reality that we're living in.
Last time we were discussing the EIDL. I think was Ken that mentioned that it's only $10,000, and I found out that that's an advance that the persons get, or the people who are borrowing. Beyond that, you can get up to $200,000. So I don't know if people have applied for that, but it's available. Well,
I
it's
can tell you,
available.
I can tell you, Elsa, that I know a lot of people in different businesses who have requested that money. The $10,000 was given out very easily. I mean, basically, you put in an application, you got $10,000. But nobody has gotten more than that, that I know of. And I think I've seen a few articles that the SBA, who runs it, there's been complaints by various politicians in Washington saying, hey guys, how come you're not giving out the money we gave you? Because they're not doing it.
Well, I know at least two people who have gotten 150 and 180,000 on top of the 10,000 to pay within 30 years at 3% rate. So
are they landlords?
No, they're not landlords.
Can I say something as well?
Yes.
Elsa?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Right. No, so from what I understand, there are some stop points with that program as well, with whether it's the SBA or if there's if that particular applicant has existing loans or other debt that exist. I think there's some stop points as to what would make them eligible to receive added funds, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
They check the credit for everybody. If you have a low credit, you don't get it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anybody else wants to add to the discussion? Yes, Evelyn first and then Tamara.
Okay, I have a question for Elliot and Ken. Kenneth, you mentioned the passing of the Kavanaugh bill for the $100 billion for tenants who have difficulty paying their rent. I just wanted to know over what time period those funds are going to be available. And in other words, how long will tenants' rents be paid by this bill?
I do not know the answer to that, Evelyn. I wish I did. My understanding is it'll be for as long as the money lasts. And it's $100 million. And it's for tenants who have more than 30% of their income going to rent. That is the main condition that I understand. Somewhat similar, I think, to the condition for Section 8, which is, I think, predicated also on 30%. Hopefully, they've already funded it. They're using the federal money coming to the state, that they can renew that, but that's up to our legislators. So perhaps if we all agree to get to the legislators, maybe they'll increase it to 500 million, who knows?
And what percentage of tenants would fall under those guidelines?
Any tenant that is paying more than 30% of their income for rent.
No, I mean the percentage of total tenants.
Oh, I have no idea what the how many tenants pay more than 30%. You can read newspaper articles that say 40% of the tenants are, 20%, 60%. It depends on which articles, which survey, and whatever. I have great hesitancy in accepting anything I read these days in the newspaper as fact.
I think Tamara goes.
I just want to add to that if I could.
Tamara first and then you, Elliot.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Tamara.
I find it a bit distressing that my colleagues are claiming that the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are like some, fly-by-night papers that do not provide information, credible information that's based on data and sources. Meanwhile, you know, there are assertions being made that all the landlords are working with their tenants, as if either of the gentlemen could possibly speak to every single landlord in Westchester County to determine that all of them are willing to cut their tenants a break and work with them. And then there are the assertions about, oh, no one is able to get more than 10,000. Where is your data? Where is the data that backs these assertions that you're making? As much as you want to, you know, to claim that what I'm saying is not credible, I've at least provided some data, some articles, some sources that at least document what I'm saying. You're saying that based on your own experience, all of this and all of that is highly suspicious in my mind.
Yes, Mr. Chairson.
A few things. The data that you're requesting comes from the fact that my law firm represents a few hundred landlords. I don't know the exact number, but quite a few. They're in New York City, they're in Nassau, and quite a few here in Westchester County. And I've been talking to them almost constantly over the past 3 months while, you know, I've not been able to go to my office. I've been working from here. They all are asking questions. I talk to them, and they're all saying the same thing. They are not out to hurt the tenants. They're willing to give them time to pay. They understand the COVID. They're not living on Mars. They certainly understand. And if a tenant wants to work with them, they are more than willing to work with the tenant. No landlord, and this is to my detriment and Ken's, no landlord wants to pay legal fees to bring tenants to court, knowing that the system in the courts, whether it's in Westchester or New York, is a pro-tenant, very, very long process of delays. It takes forever to get the money by going to court, if you get it. And what happens many times with court cases is the tenant doesn't pay, then the marshal gets to the door, knocks on the door, and what happens many, many times, and I know this from my own experience, the tenant left. They skip, owing the money. The landlord gets none of the rent, and the landlord has to pay the legal fees and the costs. So that's why they are much rather make an agreement with Mr. Jones, a tenant, who's willing to pay the back rent at 10% a month for the next 10 months or whatever it is. All of them want to do that. I also speak to people. I'm counsel to the Bronx Manhattan Association of Realtors. I deal with banks. I deal with people who own buildings. I deal with brokers. This is not something that hasn't been discussed over the past few months. This is something that's real. Plus, there's been many meetings on Zoom of bar associations and landlords and CHIP and RSA. This information comes from them. And this information is accurate.
Yes, Mr. Finger.
Yeah, I just want to say that I have avoided personalizing, and I would hope that when I'm quoted accurately. You've all heard what I've said. I never called the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal fly-by-nights, and I resent being misquoted, and I'll stand by what words I have and not by those that Ms. Tamara puts in my mouth.
And I quoted from the New York Times in my presentation.
So obviously some newspaper articles are acceptable if you quote from them, but somehow if I quote from them, they're not.
This is demeaning.
Come on, this is.
I'm not going to even respond to that.
It's not productive to get into that discussion.
I wasn't the one that made the assertion. You were.
Anybody else has any
Look,
other comment? Yes, Eddie Mae.
Right. Certainly, our responsibility is not to be fair with the landlords and with the tenants. And we're all experiencing hard times now. And we certainly, as the rent guideline members, we don't want to add to people who are homeless. We don't want the landlords to not be able to do what they have to do. And I don't know if you remember, but there were a
0.75.
couple of, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
A couple of the landlords who presented, they were asked if they were making some money.
2.5 to 3.
And they said yes. And I don't know if other people remember that being said, but it made me feel better. And I just really believe that if the landlords themselves are saying they, things aren't as bad as maybe it's, being put here, but let's look at it from both points of view and try to do the best we can with deciding, what we can do in terms of, what tenants are going to do and the landlords.
Here, here.
Anybody else has any comment? Not hearing any more comments? Oh,
Yes, I want to say something.
oh, go ahead.
Really, yes.
Yes.
So I definitely, I agree with Eddie Mae. Her point is that we are here to do the best that we can under the circumstances, especially we're in a crisis right now. We're talking about, and we talked about it the last meeting, we're in with health crisis, rent crisis, income crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We have a whole list. So where basically, okay, where is societies? Where is our society? Where are the priorities? What are the priorities? Okay, do we choose renters, let's say possibly being homeless? Or do we choose having landlords make a small profit, let's put it that way, instead of a large profit? And I don't know another way of saying that, but as I said before, I think for me, as a member and looking at the facts, actually, I'm looking at facts. I'm hearing both sides, I'm hearing the facts. We're going to talk about who's suffering the most, who's feeling it the most, who's hurting the most. And I think we're at that point where we have to sort of, I would say, make also some type of moral decision while we're contemplating what to do with this at this point,
Okay.
at this time.
I want to, did you finish? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm finished.
Yes.
Thanks.
I just want to say that as board members, I'm going to ask under the circumstances, because these are very special circumstances, I'm going to ask the owners to make reasonable and fair motions, and to same to Ms. Stewart, because this is a pandemic and we are all suffering. And to my colleagues, the public members, I want to remind you that we are representing both the tenants and the owners. And we have to remember the small landlords, and we have to remember the people who don't make a lot of profit. So with that said, I'm going to,
Elliot.
yes.
Elliot has the motion.
No, we're not ready to make the motion. I just want to give thanks to each and every one of the participants who came and took time of their busy schedules during this pandemic to come to testify in front of this board. We really appreciate that effort. And once again, I want to thank our council, Peter Stoker, for the tremendous job that he has done, and the rest of the staff. April Gray Huertas is here, and Toys Francis is here tonight. Thank you. And the rest of the HCR staff for making possible for us to meet through this venue, which was no easy task. I know that. And again, to my fellow board members for the passion, dedication, and commitment to this mission that we have been entrusted with. And with that said, I'm going to ask who wants to go first with the motion. Okay, Mr. Sherson. You.
Okay, I appreciate, before I make my motion, I appreciate very much what Chairman Rubin just stated. And it says it all, that we know how the landlords, we represent landlords, Ms. Stewart represents the tenants, and the 5 public members, you represent the public, which is made up of both. And I'd ask also, just repeating what Ms. Rubin said, that you think about both, not just one. Based upon this conversation, the hearings, and all of the information that's before us, I would propose a 2% increase for a 1 year and 3.5 for 2 years.
Okay. Peter, do you want to call the roll for the vote?
Need a second?
Wait.
Oh, second.
It
Somebody
wasn't a
has to second.
second on that.
Huh? What happened?
I didn't hear anybody second
I
that.
second it.
Yeah, sorry,
Oh.
second.
I didn't hear you.
I was muted. My apologies.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we didn't hear you. Yes.
It's rare when someone doesn't hear me. Ask my wife
Oh, dear.
or my children.
Peter, can you
Okay, do
call
you want me
the
to call the
for
roll
vote?
too? Okay, so just again, the motion was 2% for 1 year leases, 3.5% for 2 year leases. Motion made by Elliot Cherson, seconded by Ken Finger. Ken Finger,
Yes,
Elliot Cherson,
Yes.
Tamara Stewart,
No,
Eddie Mae Barnes,
No.
Lamont Badru,
No.
Evelyn Santiago,
No.
Marlene Aqua,
No.
and Chair Rubin.
No.
Okay, that motion fails with 2 in favor and 6 against.
7.
Ms.
No, there's
Stewart?
only 8 members on the board right now.
Oh, of course.
Yes. Ms. Stewart, do you want to go next?
I would like to make a motion for a 0% 1 year and 0% for 2 year on lease renewals.
In second?
Second.
Okay, Chair, do you want me to call the roll?
Yes, please.
who seconded it?
It was a 0 for 1 and 2 year. Motion made by Tamara Stewart, seconded by Eddie Mae Barnes. So I'll call the roll now.
Could you restate the motion just for clarity, please?
Sure, it was 0% for 1 year leases and 0% for 2 year leases. Okay, so Tamara Stewart,
Yes,
Eddie Mae Barnes,
Yes.
Evelyn Santiago,
Yes.
Valine Aqua,
Yes.
Lamont Badru,
Yes.
Ken Finger,
No,
Elliot Cherson,
No.
And Chair Rubin?
No.
Okay, that motion passes by a vote of 5-3.
Well, I think we have a rain guideline for 2020, 2021. And if anybody has any comment at this point, please.
I would like to explain my vote, if I may. I think that as a public member, I think it's our responsibility to look at both sides. And indeed, in my own family, I have people on both sides. I have people who are renting, and I have people who are small owners of properties. And it's the duty of this board to strike a very delicate balance between the needs of landlords and the needs of tenants who may be experiencing financial loss. But I believe that rather the landlords may be experiencing financial loss, but I believe and I know that on the tenant side, the needs are more Maslow needs of food, shelter, clothing, the very basic needs.
Medication.
And so I think that was why I made the decision that I made.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Yes, Ms. Stewart, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to thank the public members and appreciate you for recognizing the asymmetry of both resources available to tenants and landlords at an incredibly difficult time for everyone. I truly hope and pray that the jobs come back, that the economy rebounds much faster than a lot of what's being forecast. And certainly when we reconvene next year, we will have a lot more information to see whether it did or it didn't. But there are a lot of people who are hurting right now and will be for the foreseeable future. And I wanted to thank you and appreciate you for recognizing that many tenants have few or no resources to help get them through this difficult time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. If nobody else has a comment, this meeting is going to be concluded.
No, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes,
Really?
yes, Ms. Sakwa.
Yes. And I want to echo what Ms. Santiago said. It is about the needs. That's what I have been echoing myself. And I do appreciate the owners and their presentations. And I would say under what, quote, normal circumstances, the outcome may have been different. Maybe, it may have been, but I do appreciate when there is appreciation for a situation that calls for it. And that's my comment for the night. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments? If no one else has a comment, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you, everybody. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.
Good night.
Everybody be
Good
well.
night. Good night.
September.
All right.
Okay. Have a good one. Be safe.
Take care.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.